Hello and welcome to another TLC Wales podcast. I'm Caroline Pichek, Deputy Head of Service for TLC, and today I have the pleasure of Debbie Williams-Mathias. Debbie is also a TLC panel member. She has a mental health background and previously also worked with CAMHS. And Debs, you're now starting a new initiative of a business of your own, haven't you?
I am. I've finally taken the leap, Caroline.
Right, yeah.
So I've worked in CAMHS and in mental health for, over 30 years. And, I think what I've seen over the time, particularly working with children, I don't know if you feel the same, is that sometimes their mental health just is not understood. And I think it's something which I just keep on seeing over and over and over again. And again, when I've thought about it and I've spoken with colleagues about it, it's mainly to do with people around them not offering the correct support and possibly just being fearful of offering the right support or not, and I think with my skills in mental health, as a mental health nurse, a registered mental health nurse, which I'm very proud of, I think I could really help. So I've finally taken the plunge and set up my own business.
Right, okay.
Gosh.
What are you going to be doing then? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's a business that's got 6 services in it.
Gosh.
So I've been really fortunate to meet some professionals that I've been working with who have retired.
Right. Okay.
And I think, because they've retired, they've been able to give me so much more time. So these professionals have been service managers in the past, mental health service managers in the past. And now one of the services, which I'm really, really proud of, is a service design service. So, for example, when I may want to go and work in schools, because now there's a brand new curriculum that's just come out with regards to including well-being in our academic curriculum.
It is a very big thing at the moment, isn't it? There's a lot of focus on children's mental health and well-being.
Absolutely.
And I think, from a TLC perspective as well, it's one area that we really need to kind of key into as well for children with additional needs, because children with additional needs very often, a lot is overlooked as a disability rather than being their mental health or well-being side of things,
Absolutely, Caroline, because it's something, in my work that I've said over and over again, because again, particularly young people with additional needs, whether they've got learning disabilities or whether they've got physical disabilities, their well-being equally needs to be considered.
Yeah.
And quite often this is really, really misunderstood, So, for example, if they're in school and they're acting out with some behaviour difficulties, quite often then they're labelled as being naughty children. And schools don't appear to have the facilities to be able to manage this. Whereas what I was doing in my last post just before I finished working with CAMHS was working with schools to just talk to them a little bit about young people, particularly like the young people in TLC, where they may have suffered some trauma in the past.
That's right,
And that's not their fault, that's not their family's fault, but just understanding what different behaviours these young people may present, and as staff, how to support them and how to actually talk with them. So if, for example, somebody starts acting out in the classroom and starts sort of throwing a chair around the classroom or shouting at the teacher or something, for the teacher to be able to manage that in a more appropriate way. Of course, for example, keeping the young person safe, keeping the rest of the children safe and themselves, but then just thinking about how am I best to manage that? So just being quite relaxed, perhaps being quite containing, trying to figure out if there were any stresses or triggers that made this behaviour happen, and then slowly just try and work with that young child's personality, really. So really simple things that we're both mothers ourselves, Caroline, that we would use with our young people, So it's transferring those skills really from a mental health setting, and from being a mother myself to young people. But what I have noticed, and some of my colleagues, one of my colleagues, Dr. Nick Bowler, who was a Swansea University lecturer, He was a service manager in mental health,
Right.
and he's given me quite a lot of advice really around how to develop and manage services within schools, for example.
Right, okay.
Because one of the things that I had trouble with was when I got asked to take a post in school to help develop the curriculum, I didn't have any experience as a senior manager because I've always been a registered mental health nurse. So it was one of the areas that I found really broke down straight away.
Right, yeah.
But with Nick's help now, we've been able to develop this service and sort of get some ideas about going forward, talking with the senior management team, the headship team, to say, look, these are some of the things that we do need to integrate. Like, for example, we are thinking about setting up a wellbeing needs coordinator in school.
Okay. Yeah.
So they've got learning needs coordinators, Alenkos,
Yes.
and Olsenkos.
Yes.
So they deal with the young people's learning needs. So particularly with the young people in TLC, with their additional learning needs. But there isn't anybody there who really manages the young person's well-being needs. So what we thought of, and Nick came up with a really, really good idea, about developing a well-being needs plan to equal the IEP plans, the
Right,
individual
yes.
education plans, so that the young person's well-being is equally being measured. And through that plan then, the wellbeing needs coordinator would sort of coordinate and manage all of the pastoral staff and the counselling staff, and also liaise with teachers just to integrate wellbeing into schools.
Yeah.
So that's something we've been thinking about, and then thinking about how to develop service pathways in school for mental health, and how to sort of develop reviews with the senior management team, and who's accountable for the wellbeing coordinator and the wellbeing team. So again, all of these things, school, I found when I was working there, school headship teams hadn't even thought of, because they're not mental health professionals.
No, exactly.
They are academic teaching professionals. So
it's about bringing that into the school, isn't it? And bringing in people in the know who work in that area, who can advise. Yeah.
And, like all the legislation says, Caroline, and I know, like with the State of the Nation report now that you talked about earlier, the key things that people are talking about over and over and over again are co-production, people working together, staff working with families, and then we're talking about multi-agency working. And that's been one of my key things that I've always wanted to do in my career.
It's about that sharing of information and the open and honest discussions, and
absolutely
as well. It was, I think, from a foster carer perspective, that and one of the things that came out of that report was that they felt in terms of matching as well with foster placements, that a lot of information was not given to them at the time of placements. I mean, thankfully within TLC, that is one of the things that we are really kind of key into and ensure for placement stability alone, that we get the match correct. But the point being was that a lot of information about that young person wasn't shared at the time of the placement. So the result then being as well that we have placement breakdowns.
Absolutely.
So the same within a school environment, if you can get key into helping children with their well-being and, making it easier for them in that respect in schools as well, then you've got, going to have a knock-on effect of more positive behaviours as well. And,
Absolutely, Caroline. And with my business as well, it's transferable because, I also want to work with social care, and I also, I'm really passionate about working with youth offending, because again, as we see, a lot of our young people that we work with who are in foster care, have got learning disabilities, have got special educational needs, and then because that's so misunderstood and not supported properly, quite often our young people go through various placements because they can't be settled, because they're not matched properly, and then that leads then to a breakdown where people can become sexually exploited, where people can become homeless, where people can end up being incarcerated in prison, in youth offending centres, just basically because their presentation, their development hasn't been fully discussed, hasn't been fully
and understood. Really. They haven't been understood, have they?
Absolutely, and I think that's something that I've seen over and over again when I've worked in social care, exactly like what you were saying. During lockdown, I went back into work as a residential support worker. And, you know, I was quite shocked really at the fact, exactly as you say, the lack of information sharing and the effect that had on the young people. So something that I did with the organisation, because they were a really good organisation I worked with as well, we started then looking at how we matched potential employees in the company, so people who were being potentially interviewed to become support workers.
Okay, yeah.
How we would sort of like find out the most from them in a psychological way. So I adapted a tool called the Adult Attachment Interview by Mary Main. And what we started to do in the interview process was ask some of those more psychological questions with regards to potential support workers, with an aim really to see whether they're resilient enough for the work, because as we know, it is so difficult working with young people who have suffered this trauma, but also just to make sure as well that, you know, where they would be best placed, you know, with regards, and that was really successful, you know, and the feedback we also had from interviewees were that they were really impressed by the interview. It really threw them because they'd never had an interview like them, but actually it made them really think about why they wanted to come into care, and actually what type of, and really profile what type of young people they were interested in looking after as well. So that fit really worked in the organisation that I worked with. So again, that's something that I've brought into the business that we can actually offer when I'm going to be working in social care as well, you know, and youth offending. Whatever. So it's quite multi-diverse. So
it is.
That's sort of the more service design. And then some of my other services are more
I'm not going to have all the time to do this.
I don't know. I haven't got a clue. But I'm going to try. You know, I'm a mother.
I'm sure. Jokes aside, I know
we're
how
mothers,
committed
Caroline.
you are as well.
But some of the work that I'll be providing, you know, in my services is what we've done and what we've been trained to do. You know, we've been trained to do direct work. So I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a systemic psychotherapist, a family therapist. So I do quite a lot of therapy work. So what's been really helpful sometimes is when I've gone to work with organisations, I've given them the skills to be able to sort of work with young people. But quite often some young people are they've experienced so much trauma that they just need somebody with that little bit more experience to work with them. And what I've done in that instance then, Caroline, is encouraged the staff who are working with them, or the foster carers, to just come along and listen to what we're saying and just see that what I'm doing, you know, it's not sort of rocket science. You know, it's just being available to people and listening. So I do offer direct work and joint work as well. And I guess the other part of my business, which again I'm really passionate about, is education and training. You know, and I know through working with TLC, you understand this, Caroline, because being a panel member for the last couple of years, really, isn't it? You know, we've undertaken a lot of quite a bit of training, and we know how important that is to sort of just build up people's expertise.
Absolutely,
you know?
And to continue as well. You know, with our foster carers, we have a immense amount of training for them to be able to access. You know, and specific training as well that's related to the child themselves as well. You know, so if a child has a specific need, then there will be training around that, or a procedure that the child needs to have, then there's specific training as well around that. But I think being able to access the training, like you're saying, is a major thing, really. You know, it's and having variations in training so that it's not just a one box ticks all, you know.
Oh, absolutely, because when I went to work in social care, and I went to work in education in schools, and, you know, throughout my time there, you know, again, you know, what became evident was that the way that staff were managing young people was a result of their lack of experience, the lack of training in mental health. Now, I don't expect staff to be mental health nurses, because that is not what they've trained for. But, you know, each of the staff members or families, foster carers, they were asking me, am I doing the right thing? why is this young person presenting in this way? So they didn't have the basics in, you know, just basic sort of psychological development, or what happens if a young person suffers from trauma, what could the effects be? And also, as we know, Caroline, our young people talking to staff about, look, young people are adolescents, young people are children, they're normal children and adolescents. Quite a lot of what they actually are displaying is normal behaviour.
Yes.
And quite often people forget that because they are so wrapped up in the presentation of this of the young people. So a lot of my training has been around sort of normal development as well as abnormal sort of mental health issues. Doing a bit of a first aid course about how to manage anxiety, how to manage depression, which again staff have found really helpful, particularly post-lockdown.
Yes, exactly.
You know? So that's something which I offer as well. And then I offer the more specialist courses then, if they're interested. For example, the trauma recovery model is a course which I like to talk about, because again, it explains why our young people are suffering with some of the behaviours, some of the emotional sort of discomfort that they have. And there are very good sort of ways of managing this.
Yes.
So that's something which I use a lot really in my training.
I think it's really important, you know, for people, particularly people who are working with children, or, you know, be that in a sector such as residential or in fostering, that they have that knowledge and, you know, background really to help them understand that young person, where they're coming from, why the behaviour is the way it is. Because I think once you understand where that behaviour is coming from, it's far easier for you to be able to support and manage that young person, isn't it, within a home environment or a residential environment, you know?
Absolutely, Caroline. And I think the other integral thing, which again is something which I think is quite unique to what I offer, and I think it's just because of my background in mental health and psychotherapy, is basically with the foster carers or with the teachers or with any support staff, for them to start thinking about why they've come into the work that they've come in and why they have started to support, why they wanted to support these young people. Because quite often what I was seeing over and over again when I was service designing something with a company was that many of the applications would be for people who had perhaps suffered trauma themselves as young people, and they just wanted to make everything better for young people. Some people weren't really interested in working in the place, they just wanted money, you know. So it was really interesting to find out what people's motivation was, because even if people applied and they had suffered trauma in their past and they wanted to make things better, then equally we knew how to match them. We also knew really, you know, for them to start thinking about themselves, and when they're in certain situations with young people, what may come up. So if they've suffered trauma, what type of trauma could come up for themselves, and actually then they could measure whether that's their trauma or whether that is actually the young person's trauma, or whether it's combined. And that's fine, because when we know that, we can work with that.
Exactly.
Does that make sense? But quite often that's missing in training programs, because training programs just focus on the young person and they get labelled and blamed.
Yes.
You know, so again, you know, a lot of my training and the feedback I had was that it was really helpful, because people were actually stopping now. Foster carers were stopping, and staff were stopping to think about, right, actually, am I bringing stuff to this situation? Am I igniting it? You know, and then from that, you know, situations would carry on. So they would be able to monitor their own behaviour. And that changed such a lot of the dynamic, you know. So, yeah, it was really, really helpful. You know,
it's kind of on that note as well, you know, I often hear foster carers, you know, who deal with some really tricky situations and sometimes get a lot thrown back at them.
Absolutely.
And I often, the kind of things that we talk to them about is about not taking it personally, you know, because it is so easy, isn't it, when somebody's, you know, kind of at you and giving you, so having that background, that understanding, that training is what helps you as well to be able to stand back from it and not take it personally, and builds resilience in yourself then as well as a carer, you know.
But absolutely, Kat. And on the other side of that as well, you know, what was really interesting for me was when I went back to work as a residential worker for the year in lockdown, I also found as well that, you know, gosh, I've got 30 years mental health experience. You know, I've got trained in education and training. I'm trained in therapy. I'm just completing a psychology degree. You know, so again, I'm well trained in this. Working in that setting with young people permanently for a year, whether it was lockdown or not, absolutely burnt me out.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, again, I'd forgotten that as a mental health professional. And again, it's another service I've integrated with regards to clinical supervision, you know, whether it's peer-orientated, because for me, I really needed that clinical supervision once a month to sort of say I needed it more regularly than that, but unfortunately it couldn't be provided. But I really needed that supervision, you know, for myself, to be able, for people to turn around and say to me, you're normal and you're human and you are going to experience these things, you know. So again, that's another one of the services. I think
that's, again, you know, linking it back in. Now I'm talking about fostering because, you know, we are a fostering agency. But again, linking it back in, you know, the support that foster carers get from our supervising social workers is so hugely important, you know, and like you're saying, it's that time to offload, isn't it, as well, you know. It's not, you know, it is about you as a foster carer or you as the carer and how you're feeling and how you're managing, and having that social worker that's a close contact for you and being able to provide that support is what also keeps the placements going, you know, and keeps you going as a person, doesn't it? You
Absolutely.
know?
And I think, you know, again, one of the things that we provide that we don't advertise, which again, I've advertised in my business, is that we are advocates for the young people.
Yes.
We're advocates for the family. And, you know, when I'm in panel and I'm sitting in panel as a panel member for TLC, I see families come here for whatever reason, whether we're having annual reviews or whether they're asking to become foster carers. And I see their supervising social workers, or I see the assessors come in here, and, you know, they know so much information about a family and a person, but actually you can see the warmth of the relationship that they've actually got as well, and that person really trusts their assessor, you know, and that is something that's so important.
It really is,
to start building that relationship, you know, with people, which again, organisations sometimes don't understand, you know, like for example schools or wherever, or other social care organisations, they don't understand the importance of that. And sometimes with the young people, we are the only people that they have, or sometimes with the foster carers, you know, sometimes we are the closest people that they do have. And it's really important that they have us, you know, so I think that's a really important service as well.
So, wow, quite a lot that we managed to pack in there, Deb.
I think we did. I think I'm exhausted already, Caroline. Do you want to come and work with my service?
Oh, I don't know about that. But I know you're probably going to be doing an outstanding job. And it sounds really good. And I wish you all the very best. You know, and hopefully our paths will cross in a different line some point as well.
I'm quite sure it will, Caroline.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Deb.
That's okay. And thank you.
Okay.